Welcome back to the Alternative Ideas Podcast. I'm really glad that you're here. My name is Jonathan Brush, and with me is the incomparable David Rethemeyer. We are here once again to take a look at everything. Well, not everything. That would be false advertising, David. We're going to look at a few things from what has happened in AI this past week and provide some perspective on that. 2 weeks ago, we had a pretty positive kind of show about AI. I think we talked about Star Wars and droids and a bunch of other things. Last week, we had a little note of caution creep into the show as we talked about regulations and had some ideas about that. And David, I think today we're a little bit more on the caution track. We're kind of got a few stories that popped up this week that in some cases are head scratching. In some were sort of like darkly humorous from my standpoint. But it did prompt some ideas, and at least my discussion topic of the day has a little bit of dark overtones or undertones, perhaps, just because of some of the developments happened this week. But your story is a pretty interesting one, although maybe when surprised for who could have seen that coming, and everybody says, I could have seen that coming. So what you got, David?
Yeah. And so just for a reference for anybody who happens to be watching this for the very first time, first of all, we're happy that you're here. And second of all, sort of our goal for this is to provide at least more of, not necessarily a middle ground, but more of an alternative take on a lot of the news media and publications that are out on AI today. We've got some very different perspectives, just from not only a generational standpoint, from just a familiarity with technology standpoint, and we're just hoping to provide a little bit more of a different context for what you might be hearing about artificial intelligence today. But having said that, today we are looking at something that, is not terribly surprising. I think we pretty much all could have seen it coming if you have been thinking about AI and its implications. But for those of you who may not have been seeing, so ChatGPT is the pretty much universally like the biggest AI program that is the most popular right now. And OpenAI, the company behind it, just released the source code behind ChatGPT 4, which is their latest version. And so now people are able to essentially take some of the structure around ChatGPT and use it to essentially kind of make some of their own versions. And because the reason OpenAI is able to do this is because they're big enough to be able to still keep a hold of their market share and not be too concerned about anybody who is using their source code for this. And so what has been done with this is that we have now something called WormGPT, which is already a rather concerning name. But the basic idea,
like rattlesnake GPT. I mean, right? David Zuckerman.
Yeah, it's and at least the headline in the article that I have is WormGPT is a ChatGPT alternative with, quote, no ethical boundaries or limitations. And it's one of the main purposes behind it, that at least it has been used for, at least that is being reported, is that it is helping hackers to create malware and phishing attacks, and is basically, naturally, because it has no guardrails on it, being used to do lots of nefarious things that pretty much anybody who has been concerned about AI has been worried about AI getting used for since the beginning.
So, David, let me contextualize this a little bit. So I think this is the same general principle that Google does with Android, right? So doesn't Google release a source code for Android so that people can build their own devices and things like that? And then is that the correct parallel here?
So, actually, I need to go back and apologize and reread something. So it is not their source code. It is called the API, which is basically a development kit that they specifically release to allow other people to develop their own versions based on what they've created. It's not their source code. I misused the terms there. My apologies. But
no, that's all right. That's why I asked the clarification.
But yes, you are correct in that lots of like big companies and software development companies release APIs, and Android is a great example of that.
So in contrast, Apple does not release their API, right?
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
so Google releases their API for Android, and that allows all kinds of third-party people, like for example, Amazon Kindles run on some version of Android, if I remember correctly, and various other systems run Android. Okay, so you have ChatGPT basically taking a page out of Google's playbook here and saying that, hey, we're going to release this API, not source code. David's clarification for those of you who know what David's talking about, which doesn't necessarily include me. And so now you can build your own version of this. So Amazon took Android and said, we're going to use this general API, and then we're going to basically skin something, and we're going to have this thing called Kindle. And so you can get a Kindle Fire, which is basically a tablet, but then also is optimized to run Amazon's content. And so the idea here is that ChatGPT is saying you can take this and basically have a working AI that you can then customize to some extent for your own content and your own specifications that you need. David, am I tracking correctly in terms of what is going on here?
Pretty much, yeah. The one of the easier ways to think about it is that they're basically allowing people to make their own and to license the work that they have already done and to make other versions of what the product that they've already made, or different flavors you could think of per se.
So I might, for example, if I was a financial advisor, I might take this ChatGPT, what'd you call it? API. ChatGPT API, and use it to build a chatbot in my site that was optimized to answer common financial questions for investors. That would be a non-nefarious use for this. So
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe we should look at both sides of this. So to some extent, and I don't know why I find the Star Wars universe thing so compelling. So to some extent, this is basically like, hey, build your own droid. Like you can now build some systems and build some tools that are optimized for your particular business, for your particular need and necessity. And an API means that, yes, you have to have some technological know-how, but you don't have to be a original coder, I guess. Is that the way to say it, David? In other words, you have to understand code and some things like that, but you don't have to write it because it's now basically written. You just have to then, write the stuff that implements the core stuff into whatever you're doing. Is that, you love my technical terms there, stuff and core stuff. Those are super, super technical. So
yeah. I think you're on the right track here. And yeah, basically
that's David polite for, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm about to fix this. So go ahead, David.
Yeah, basically what you're allowed to do is just take the core functions of what an AI like ChatGPT is able to do, and that is to take in queries from a user, take in what you type into the chat box, and essentially try to understand what the user is looking for and then deliver it. Now, OpenAI is obviously going to keep its massive database of information that it's trained ChatGPT on, because that's sort of their competitive advantage that they have accrued via variously amounts of legal ways. But essentially they're letting other companies use this logic to do other things. So, you can have a financial advisor using it, or the other thing that I have heard the example of it being used for is putting it on medical sites. So being able to essentially have a more informed doctor on command, rather than just putting your diagnosis into Google and just having Google immediately take you to the WebMD article that says that you have cancer no matter what it is.
But actually my first thought is that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, like I always joke, like if you have a hangnail, WebMD will eventually tell you that you'll die. But I just feel like with the hallucination problems that ChatGPT has, this is almost certainly, I mean, like I cannot even imagine trusting ChatGPT with a medical diagnosis at this point. I can believe that AI has potential in this area, but when ChatGPT hallucinates about who wrote what book, and we've had our own staff do this, Googled what, we've had staff who ChatGPT has known that the staff wrote certain books and gave them credit for it, and then credited them with 14 other books that they'd never written. And so it seems to me that, especially when it comes to medical diagnosis, that's just really fraught for craziness with the hallucination problems that the program has.
It would have to be something that you would have to do a lot of work to it to keep it very strict, and most likely would have to include a bunch of disclaimers for legal reasons, particularly saying, hey, this is not meant to replace a doctor. Do not just type this in and to just get a diagnosis from a doctor. This is just meant, I could see it much more being that type of thing where you put into this chatbot your symptoms and it tells you whether or not you should come in and get these things analyzed by a doctor. Now, naturally, because of how the medical system works today, then there's a good chance it would probably lean towards telling you to go see a doctor and pay the doctor more often than not. But
well, cheer up. If you're in Canada, it would probably lean towards telling you to go see a doctor to get prescribed for MAID, and then you could kill yourself. So, I mean, there's that. So that's a helpful clarification. So on one hand, we should be honest here and maybe a little bit more optimistic than we have been recently and say that this is kind of the unshackling of AI, allowing, and we might argue this like from a free market perspective, allowing the creativity of people to use this. So people have done some work that built up the logic base, and now all of a sudden it's like, hey, let's turn this loose and see how people can use this. And I think the results are going to be pretty exciting, with people saying, here, I can make this thing a better at diagnosis, and maybe we can find people that can stop the hallucination problems. And yes, I can answer your investor questions and all this kind of thing. So in some ways, this is quite exciting, and it's AI kind of being turned loose on the creativity of people, and who knows what's going to come next. But people would be an operative word there, and people do other things besides cause ChatGPT to fix their hallucinations for medical diagnosis, and instead they do other things. And so, yeah, the first thing that comes out and gets headlines is when somebody took this and said, let's see what happens if we strip off all the guardrails and what does this do? So anyhow, David, does this article go on to say, so it's hackers. This has got to be a pretty interesting situation for security companies right now. If you're now fighting against not just flesh and blood hackers, but an AI that can, run multiple scenarios and things like that, right?
It is and it isn't. So what's interesting is that I think that it has the potential to create some fairly large concerns. However, at the moment, at this current moment, really all it's doing is just replicating what humans have already figured out how to do. So the main thing is that it is able to create a convincing email and a convincing structure for what's called a phishing attack. So if you have ever gotten an email that looks like, say, for example, it's from Chick-fil-A saying that you have earned enough rewards points to get a free sandwich, and you should click here to get the free sandwich, but it's not actually from Chick-fil-A. It's from somebody who's wanting you to enter in your personal information in the guise of getting a free chicken sandwich so that they can then take your information and use it for nefarious purposes.
Yeah, right now, every day somebody's telling me that my business qualifies for COVID refunds. And yeah, I mean, including a lot of businesses I don't own. So, yeah.
Yep, exactly. So this particular case with WormGPT is that it's really good at creating a lot of those types of things and streamlining that process. But those were things that, frankly, are already in existence. I think, so as of right now, it's not doing anything that's mind-bendingly threatening or hugely revolutionary, but I think it has the potential to, once people have more time with this and are figuring out how to essentially make plugins to more advanced systems that will allow it to do more advanced nefarious things. But ultimately, I think this goes back to a point that we talk about a lot on this show, is that at the end of the day, this is AI is a tool. And AI is a tool that has the potential to do some really cool stuff, and the tool that has the potential to do some really messed up, unethical stuff. And really, at the root of this, what's interesting is that WormGPT is basically just an AI that just has no limitations that have been put in place on it, which we actually talked about last week a little bit, that putting some limitations on AI might be a good thing in some cases. And so this might be, having this come out might be a really good way to incentivize and to showcase the fact that, hey, maybe some limitations on AI are actually, a really good thing to have. But at the end of the day, it's not the AI itself and its capabilities aren't necessarily going to be the main thing that is evil per se. It's going to be the humans behind it that are using it and tweaking it and using it for evil purposes.
Well, so if you're pessimistic, then this is the beginning of the inevitable AI takeover. If you're an optimist, this is the beginning of the great creativity explosion for AI. And I think it's probably typically a little bit of both. But David, along with this comes Elon Musk along to save us. And this article is from The Guardian. There's so much about this article, and I'm not sure how much
Elon
of it
Musk
is subject or
such a fascinating figure for so many reasons, and especially with how anything he does gets reported in the news media is endlessly fascinating to me.
So I don't know if this is an AI story, if this is a human interest story, if this is a media story. It's probably a little bit of all those things. And so there's some really wild stuff here. So first of all, it's the headline. Elon Musk launches AI startup and warns of a Terminator future. Now, I just wonder, like, who wrote that headline, right? I mean, is that a self-contradictory headline? Is that I mean, there's just so much in there, and I guess it works because I was like, I've definitely got to click on this. So, and then the subtitle is Tesla boss claims pro-humanity, in quotes, xAI offers realistic alternative to pausing development of superintelligence, which is a mouthful. All right. So Elon Musk is launching, I'm just going to go through this article. Elon Musk is launching an artificial intelligence startup that will be pro-humanity. As he said, the world needed to worry about the prospect of a Terminator future in order to avoid the most apocalyptic AI scenarios. Now, David, it's been a really long time since I've seen Terminator. So I think there's like, it's obviously been a while since the Guardian saw this too. So I think the whole point of Terminator is Skynet eliminates humanity, but the Terminator is in fact an AI that comes back to rescue humanity. Did I remember the plot line reasonably? I mean, I saw Terminator when it first came out, so this is a long time ago. So is this right? That's right, because the Terminator Schwarzenegger is a robot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you have. So basically, I think what the Guardian is trying to say is that Elon Musk is trying to create the Arnold Schwarzenegger AI, not the kill everybody
Skynet AI, right?
Yeah, Skynet AI, which, if I remember correctly, was a dude with man with no eyes, sunglasses, and blonde hair, spiky. Right? I think that's right. It's a long time since I saw the movie, David.
It's been a while for me too.
Okay, not as long as me, I guarantee you.
True.
So, all right. And then there's this winner of a line. This is absolutely blows my mind, this line right here. Musk said xAI would seek to build a system that would be safe because it was maximally curious. First of all, is maximally a word? Maximally curious? I don't know.
Well, so it's Elon Musk, so at this point he just gets to make up words at this point, and people will tout his brilliance.
It's got an X in it, so it's clearly a Muskism.
Yes.
Okay, maximally curious about humanity, rather than having moral guidelines programmed into it. Okay, general listeners and viewers, I'm going to read that one more time. Musk said xAI would seek to build a system that would be safe because it was maximally curious about humanity rather than having moral guidelines programmed into it. Okay, the philosopher, me, no X's in that, just wants to say, so where is the a priori assumption that curious AIs protect people without moral guidelines? Is curiosity a moral system? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then the next segment from an AI, this is a quote, from an AI safety standpoint, ... I don't know what was said in between there. A maximally curious AI, one that is trying to understand the universe, is, I think, going to be pro-humanity.
Which implies that an AI that is not, quote unquote, maximally curious is going to be anti-humanity somehow.
There's a large heaping scoop of uncertainty in there. From a safety standpoint, a maximally curious AI, one that's trying to understand the universe, is, I think, going to be pro-humanity. What exactly prompts one to think that? I don't understand the logic behind that statement, right? And so then it goes on to say, yeah, he called for it to be paused, but that's not realistic. So, which is just hilarious in itself.
So basically, he said if you can't beat him, join him.
Right. Beat him in his case, or make him more curious. And then he said there's a possibility of a darker future. No kidding. And so, yeah, and it goes on from there, and you can read the rest of the article if you want. But there's just some wild stuff in here. curiosity rather than ethical controls, that I think a curious AI will guard humanity. I don't understand. I have a curious dog. I don't know why that gives him an ability to be better equipped at guarding me from an attacking bear. I mean,
right. Your
I don't see those
capabilities
things
to advocate for something are different than your capabilities to be curious about something. I don't see how those two are related.
Well, and I could even go a step further. I mean, my curious dog is more likely to find a bear and tick him off than, I mean, right? I mean, like, dog's like, what is in this cave? Oh, wow, it's a bear. Get out of here. The bear comes out ticked off. I mean, that seems to be more of a realistic scenario. The dog is like, I'm curious, therefore I'm going to do a better job at protecting Jonathan. I mean, there's just some really interesting things there. So anyhow, that's, does it have a darker undertone? Yes. I mean, and then you got to wonder, is like, is Musk, I don't know, there's an interesting, is a populace who is scared of the Terminator more willing to do things? Yes, certainly. What exactly is Musk hoping to do here? I don't know. And so, yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at the website, which is literally like www.x.ai, which kudos to him for getting that domain, because that's a creative one.
Yeah.
He like literally there's so little information on it. It'll be linked down in the description below, along with everything else we talk about today. It's basically like its only line that's on there is that its goal is to understand the true nature of the universe.
Yeah.
Goodness, that is a goal. That is, wow. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was going to come up with that with some of my discussion later, is that there was just a breathtaking claim there. But before I actually trip the trigger and get on my soapbox, David, what is it that you wanted to, I mean, did you want to keep on here with the Elon Musk thing, or did you have some, want to turn us in slightly different directions before we get back on the soapbox? So.
Yeah, no, I think this is the perfect opportunity to get onto the soapbox here. And I think this is a good transition into what you were wanting to talk about. So I'd say fire away.
Well, yeah, so I saw that too, David. I saw Musk saying, there is, again, there's a juxtaposition here that I think is really essential for people to keep in mind. There's a sleight of hand that I'm not willing to say is deliberate and for some nefarious superpower reason. I think there's a bit of human nature that's playing in here. And bear with me for a second, because this is going to be a weird juxtaposition. Literally right before this, so Dave and I were on a meeting for the company we work for, Unbound, prior to this, and then there was a little bit of a gap. And during that gap, I went down. I'm working from home, and so I went down to the river, which is below my house, and I went down there because my son has built a canoe, 2 canoes actually, and this is its first time hitting the water, because he's preparing this Friday to go on a canoe trip that will take him from our backyard to the Chesapeake Bay, which is many hundreds of miles away. And so that'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, like 4 river systems, and then into the Chesapeake Bay. So it's a big trip, and it's one he's been planning on for a while. And he's built the canoe and the gear that takes him. And so this was the maiden voyage, if you want, of this canoe going in the water, and we were testing it out and seeing how it worked. Okay, so the point is that there's something uniquely human about that. There's something uniquely specific about that. There's something that cannot be replaced on a screen, right? So that's a very human thing to do. And then there's a piece of this that all makes sense, right? Like that there's something visceral about building a boat, about putting it on water and watching it float, and then experiencing nature and reality as you go down this river, right? And then you kind of come over, and somebody who's about as visceral as you can get, somebody who makes rockets, for crying out loud, and cars and high ends of technology, that physical stuff that blast off and go into space, right? I mean, because this is a wild, that's kind of taking boat building to the extreme, right? Truss had a line that says, I'm going to build a machine that can understand reality. There's a logical disconnect in that statement that if we're not careful, we will let slide by like that made sense. That would, I'm trying to search for the analogy here, David. That would be like, to some extent, that'd be like my son saying, I'm going to build a canoe that will show me, that will allow the river to teach me how to make the best canoe possible. Like the canoe is going to teach him. When in fact, what's going to happen is he's going to build a canoe that is going to interact with reality, that is going to teach him something about how to do that, but that he is going to have to evaluate what feedback it was. It too chippy? Did it turn too fast? Did it track too little? Did it take on too much water? Did it sit too high? Was it too slow? I mean, like, he's going to have to evaluate all those things and then define that and go forward again. But there's something illogical about this idea that we will build something that then somehow surpasses the builder in knowing, and especially when something when it comes to truth. And, I think that's what's wild to me is that news outlets are reporting that and making that statement sound normal when it would be about the most non-normative thing anybody's ever said. There's really no place in history where people realistically thought that what they created was able to surpass the creator.
I can think of a couple scenarios.
No. Yeah, I'm going. Except if you're talking about pagan religions and creating idols. And that then becomes the very definition of creating an idol, right? So in a pagan religion, you would build an idol out of wood. And if you're a Christian, and if you're not a Christian, hang with us. This is not just a religious statement, okay? So hang with me for a second here. The Old Testament is full of the God of the Israelites saying, this is ridiculous. You're building a piece of wood that I made. I made you, and you're making something else. And then you think that this piece of wood is going to rule over you. You made this calf to rule over you. He says to the Israelites in Exodus when Moses goes up to get the Ten Commandments, and Aaron has the people, throw the jewelry into the fire, and they, cast a golden calf and says, this is your God. And basically what they're saying is that this thing that we made now surpasses us, and it knows more than we do. And we as moderns look at that and say, well, that just is absolutely crazy. I mean, I'm going to take a piece of wood, carve it, put a face in it, and say, oh, this is a God. And yet that is the very definition of what we're doing. And my point here, whether you're Christian or not, is that societies that can actually find their way forward are not societies that make idols, that make obvious idols and think that those idols have the ability to be superior to those that made them. And societies that do that go down some pretty interesting dead ends, and that often have really bad consequences for the people in those dead ends, maybe a la Terminator. And so a right ordering of what exactly it is that you're creating and who created whom and for what reason and how you define truth, that ends up being a pretty important thing. And I think, to quote Elon, it would behoove us to be maximally curious about truth before we start creating machines to figure it out for us. So anyhow, I will now carefully step off the soapbox before I start foaming at the mouth. And
Sure.
There's some big ideas that I think are just not being unpacked on a bunch of headlines that are assuming some really breathtaking assumptions that I think lead in some significantly impactful ways, impactful places. So
yeah. I think really just what we're seeing is that this is just another aspect of really what all of what idolatry is, and of what worshiping idols is that it's taking something and elevating it because it is something that is advantageous to you. Ultimately, any sort of idol worship at the end of the day is out of thinking that you will get something out of it that is better. And so in this specific case, there's a bunch of different cases of this happening throughout history, but in this specific case with artificial intelligence, to an extent, I think it's looking to AI to be able to process and learn and understand. Basically, it's a god of information is almost what it is, in how it's being presented. And essentially, it's not us casting an idol saying, because we have this idol, it is this god is going to allow us to do what we want. And so this idol of AI is going to allow us to surpass our human limitations, and what we have created is going to allow us to make us better than how we were originally intended to be. And there's just a whole lot that is problematic about that. But I think ultimately the primary thing is that it is looking to something that is created as a source of value for who you are as an individual. Is that if you are looking to something like this to make yourself basically like find your fulfillment, find your purpose, if you're looking to something created to find purpose, you are ultimately never going to find satisfaction, because at the end of the day, at least in the framework that we are coming from a Christian perspective, is that the only way that you can find true fulfillment in the reality is by looking to the creator of reality and finding what he says and looking to him for fulfillment.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points, David. And I think that, and this is I said earlier, even if you're not really just hang with us for a second, so some important points to be made. And I would ask you to still hang with us, but this is more of a religious statement based on our Christian worldview. And that is that I think that there's a reality of the universe that says that there is a hierarchy of making, that there's less derivative value as you go down the chain. Right. So in other words, God created humans. And so there's an aspect here that humans, by the very nature of the foundations of the universe, do not surpass God in glory. And then I think that is also true as you come down, right? That which humans create will not surpass God in glory. And so, and that would apply to a carved idol, but it applies just as much to a highly sophisticated, coded, maximally curious AI. That still in this hierarchy, there is a value level that does not translate. That there's a loss of value, a lessening of value as you go down, and that there's something foundationally important about that. That if we get that mixed up, there's a really good not a good possibility. There's ample evidence, is the way I should say it. There's ample evidence that if you look at that in history, when that has mixed up, that's almost always when things go badly. And bad ideas lead to bad consequences, and those consequences can really disproportionately hurt certain people, especially people that have less power. And so, as maybe our big alternative idea for this podcast is to understand the impact of some of these ideas, right? So there are ideas out here, some of which are bad. So it's a great idea to make ChatGPT hallucinate less and then become a more accurate, helpful way to diagnose illness online. I think that's a really good value add for humanity. But then there's another idea that is we should create an AI that has no ethical constraints and hope that if it's curious, it will help protect humanity. Probably an idea that has significant consequences and not necessarily positive ones. There ought to be those of us who step up and say, I call a flag in this play, and want us to sort of stop and think and consider a little more before we just, read the headline, shrug our shoulders, and it's like, oh, there's Elon over there creating something interesting again. I guess that'll turn out well. So,
yeah. Well, and I think this ultimately leads into kind of the final point that I was hoping for us to discuss today, and that is that something that we have talked about a lot over the course of this podcast and even over the course of this episode is the importance of humanity. And especially in the context of advancing technology and AI, why being human and the nature of that and trying to basically undermine and supplant that in any way has major consequences. And I thought it would be good to kind of cap off this episode that has had a little bit more of a critical or warning tone with just a discussion of why we think that's so important. And I think we've just talked about it quite a bit, but I think just as sort of a refresh and a bit of a summation that being human because we are created beings and we are created with purpose is one of the most important, impactful things that we can recognize as truth. Is that the fact that we have been created first and foremost, and that we are created with purpose, we are created as individuals. All of those things, philosophers and theologians have been trying to wrap their minds around it for as long as we have been on this earth. Is some of the most impactful things that we can understand and we can appreciate. And so whenever we look to technology to essentially say being human is not enough, we need more than humanity. We need to be able to create something that will allow us to surpass our humanity. That's where essentially the whole idea of transhumanism comes in, is that if you go towards that, if you follow that logic, is that you're going to be looking to essentially what other cultures have been doing for centuries and what humanity has been doing as long as they've existed, which is looking to something other than the purpose that their creator has given them to find fulfillment.
Yeah, those are big ideas. And I think that maybe as we finish up here, is if you're listening to this, they're big ideas that all of a sudden have local importance. Mm-hmm. And that's really always true of big ideas. So the big ideas that are sweeping society often come home and have the biggest impacts in your local neighborhood. And often with the least of these, with the people that are kind of at the bottom of the social ladder. And so AI, there's nothing to think that AI would not be different here, that the implications of AI will find a local impact. And many of those will be positive, and we've certainly had many episodes about that, and I assume we will in the future. And there's some really exciting potentials and possibilities and things like that. But some of them will not be. And so it's worth, even if you're not a tech person, even if you're not really fascinated with AI, you obviously have some interest if you're listening to this episode or watching this episode. But to think about this and to just spend a little time considering. I'll finish this, and then I'm teaching a class tonight for a class that we offer students called Navigate, and it's about how to make wise decisions. And to some extent, what we say in that class, and we say it in a bunch of different ways, and we give our students tools and techniques to think this through, it's to that people who are willing to stop and reflect on what happened and the implications of what happened are people that ultimately do better going forward, right? So that all of us have the situation where the next thing is in front of us, and that can be all kinds of different things. And we can either just sort of keep doing the next thing and never consider what happened, or we can be the kind of people that take the next thing and say, what are the implications of this? What is this useful for? What is the good and what is the bad that comes out of this? And that reflective piece we teach our students, that little pause to reflect, that is the big mark of difference between people who are quote unquote successful and those that are not. And successful in this case means people that have a bigger influence and a bigger impact on their world and the people around them. And so I guess our call to you and our encouragement to you would be to do that. When these AI headlines came racing in, stop and say, what exactly does it mean to be maximally curious? Is that a really good safeguard protecting humanity? What is the goal here? And so there's a terrifying headline. WormGPT is about to, do all this damage. But what is the other side of that? What are the good things that could come from the fact that ChatGPT is OpenAI is releasing their API? And what are some of the things that come out of that? And all of those are reflective pieces. And so as we hurtle towards new horizons, things that we've not seen before as a culture and as a people, having folks who stop and reflect can often be the difference between where we ultimately end up, and can be the difference about where you and your family ends up. So that would be an alternative idea that is probably worth considering.
Well, I think that hopefully, if you've listened all the way through this episode, you have quite a few alternative ideas that you have listened to. And despite all of the headlines about Terminator AI, hacking AI, and all of the implications therein, we hope that you leave a little more curious for your own sake, not for the sake of developing a maximally curious AI, but hopefully curious enough to let us know what you thought about this episode and about some of the ideas that we posited. We would love to hear from you in the comments down below.
And at the end of the day, if this all gets too much for you, don't forget to go to your local river or trail or woods or nature walk and reconnect. And remember, there's a big old physical world out there that far surpasses anything that AI can or will produce, likely, in terms of fascination and interest. And sometimes just a return to reality is all it needs to get you the perspective to be reflective. And as we mention often on this podcast, if you're looking for an alternative idea when it comes to preparing for your future, maybe we suggest Unbound's Ascend program. And at this point, if you're listening to this episode shortly after it's released, most people have college plans, but there's a group of you out there who have decided that you're not going to college. You could have, but you decided not to. And you decided that that was too expensive and you weren't sure what you wanted to do. And so you're going to stay home and work instead. And so first of all, we applaud you for that decision. That's from our perspective, there's some wisdom in that. But we might also suggest that there are a few missing pieces that if you had those, it can make all the difference in how this year is going to go. And so if you're curious about those missing pieces and want to learn more about them, go to don'twastethisyear.com. That's don'twastethisyear.com. And you can find out information about Ascend and the program that we offer, but also several webinars that we've recorded that you can get access to there that discuss some ways that you can make sure that you don't waste this year and make it one of the best that you've ever had, and do the kinds of things that will actually prepare you and set you up for success. So check out don'twastethisyear.com to learn about Unbound's Ascend program and some of the options that are available for you.
Thank you very much for joining us for this episode of the Alternative Ideas Podcast. We'll be back next week. We hope to see you then.